Jenny Orton ordered an Uber driver because she needed to get to her sister's annual Halloween party. Her boyfriend, Jack, was out of town visiting his father, so an Uber was Jenny's only option at the time of night. She used Uber every now and then, but usually Jack would be the one to take her wherever she needed to go. As Jenny got into the Honda Civic, she was instantly taken aback by the driver. He was wearing an all-black suit, leather gloves, and a creepy pumpkin mask. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you," said the driver. "I just like to dress up for Halloween. Take no notice of me. I'm like a big child come this time of year." "Well, your costume is pretty cool," Jenny replied, as the disturbing face of the pumpkin mask stared back at her. For the first few minutes of the drive, the driver was silent, which made Jenny feel more comfortable. She had always hated small chit-chat anyway. Then, the driver started trying to have a conversation with her, which made Jenny feel very awkward. "So, have you watched any scary movies lately?" "I'd imagine so, given the month." "Not really, no. Horror movies aren't really my thing." Just as she said that, Jenny started paying attention to an unusual smell that had been plaguing her nose since she entered the car. The smell seemed to be coming from the trunk. Jenny considered mentioning it to the driver, but given that she was halfway to the party, she decided to just sit there and endure the stench. Then, for whatever reason, Jenny found herself looking at the rear view mirror. An uncomfortable feeling strapped itself to her as she saw the sinister eyes of the driver staring back at her. In his deep, raspy voice, the driver then said something that left Jenny's bottom lip quivering with fear. "I watched a really good scary movie last night. It was about this girl who ordered an Uber driver to take her to a Halloween party. But little did she realize that the Uber driver had been watching her every movement for weeks. As she sat in the back seat, distracted, not too far away from her in the trunk, was the disfigured body of her boyfriend, who she thought was still visiting his father. The driver then parked the car on the side of the road. He opened up his glove compartment, where he kept his large knife, and then jumped into the back seat. He mutilated the girl beyond recognition, and then sat next to her for hours, staring at her bloody corpse. Jenny's entire body began to tremble as the Uber driver pulled up on the side of the road, a road Jenny didn't recognize. There was nothing but trees and darkness surrounding the car. The masked driver opened the glove compartment and grabbed a rusty hunter's knife. He glanced back at Jenny as his eyes widened with a sickening pleasure. "I guess it's true what they say. Life really does imitate art." When me and my friend Dave would get together, we usually brought out the worst in each other. It had been that way since we were kids. He and I always got up to no good, causing our parents nothing but unnecessary stress and hassle. I lost count of how many times I was grounded or given detention because of my troublesome ways that were influenced by wanting Dave's approval. All of this came to a head a couple of months ago, when mine and David's actions led to a truly horrifying ordeal. Dave suggested the idea of putting a flaming envelope through the door of an Uber driver that was allegedly disrespectful to Dave's father days prior. I did not want to do this, but I also didn't want to say no to Dave, so I reluctantly agreed. At around 12:30 at night, I snuck out of my house and met up with Dave. I followed him on my bike as he headed towards the house of the Uber driver. As we arrived, a huge smile crossed Dave's face. He got some kind of weird thrill doing these sort of things. I, however, was feeling the exact opposite. I wanted to be literally anywhere else. Dave walked up to the front door of the house. He pulled out the brown envelope from his coat pocket, as well as a box of matches. His smile intensified as he lit the match. Dave hovered the envelope over the match until it caught fire. He quickly pushed it through the mail slot and took off, running back to his bike. We both took off in a panic. Dave was laughing hysterically, while I fake laughed my way home. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, as I got ready for school, I overheard my parents discussing a fire that had happened the night before. "That's so awful. Poor Barry was lucky to survive it," said my mom. Brian from across the street told me that he suffered some really nasty burns to his face and back. How he made it out of the house is beyond me. My heart was ready to burst out of my chest. as I learned that the house of the Uber driver Dave and I visited late that night before had burned to the ground. I texted Dave, telling him about it. His response was 2 laughing emojis, followed by a dozen fire emojis. I couldn't believe that he thought it was funny. It made me feel sick to my stomach. From there on, I stopped hanging around Dave and cut off all communication with him. I ignored all of his texts until one late Saturday night when I was awoken by pinging coming from my phone. The text read, "I need you, please help. Come meet me at Bacon's Park ASAP." A part of me thought he was just messing around, trying to get a reaction out of me. But there was a small part of me that was genuinely concerned, and I ended up giving in to that concern. I snuck out of my house and rode my bike to the nearby park. I arrived and was initially greeted by nothing but the cold air that blew through the depressing January night. I sent Dave a text message asking where he was. Upon sending it, I immediately heard a distant pinging sound. It was coming from the swing set. I ran towards it. As it got closer, I recognized Dave's gold iPhone 7 laying on the first swing set seat on the left. I approached it and was left feeling uneasy as I saw that the phone was completely drenched in blood. The feeling of uneasiness turned to terror as my eyes found themselves glancing over to the grass that sat behind the swing set. Laying in the muddied grass with a disturbed look on his face was the dead body of Dave. Before I could even give a valid reaction, I was startled by a weird grunting sound. I turned to my left, and standing 5 feet away from me, holding a pair of scissors, was a disfigured man. The left side of his face was completely burnt. It didn't take long for me to figure out who this was. It was the Uber driver. How he knew it was us, I have no idea. But he knew, and his hands were shaking with rage as he looked into my direction. I'm sorry, he did it, not me," I screamed at the man. He didn't react. He just glared at me with a hatred I could feel piercing through my soul. I ran back to my bike and rode it home at a ridiculous speed. There was a few months ago now, and I haven't told anyone about my experience. Dave's death affected me in ways I cannot describe. His dead face staring back at me is an image I will never forget. Every night since Dave's murder, the Uber driver has been standing outside of my house, staring up at my bedroom window. However, last night was the first time he brought his bloody scissors with him. I have a feeling that I don't have much time left. So, to all those who I've upset over the years because of my mischievous ways, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. I started working as a cab driver in late 2017. Signing up to Uber was a pretty straightforward process, and the idea of having flexible work hours was very appealing. For the first couple of years, I was content with my job, and I had no bizarre or unusual experiences. Then, that night happened. The night of February the 2nd, 2020. It was a rainy, thunder-riddled night as I drove to pick up my next customer. The request came from a guy called Henry Six, and he wanted to be picked up from a local bar I knew all too well. I parked outside and waited for him. Not even a minute later, a man climbed into the back seat of my car. I got a good look at him through the rear-view mirror. He was a middle-aged guy with gray hair and a large mustache. What really caught my attention, though, was the scar on his left cheek. It was a gruesome visual. "Hello, sir. How are you on this fine evening?" I asked. "Fine," he muttered under his breath. He certainly didn't seem like the talking type, so I thought it was best to not try and start a conversation. I turned on the radio and gently put my foot down on the gas. A few minutes passed, and I was faintly humming Blue Oyster Cult's "Don't Fear the Reaper" under my breath. I love that song. I usually can't help myself when it starts playing. "Can you stop that?" said the man in a low-pitched voice. "Stop what?" I replied. "The humming. You're humming. Just stop." "Sorry, dude. Jeez." I turned off the radio and we were now in complete silence. It remained that way for a minute or two before the man asked me a random question. "Do you believe in God, son?" "Yes, sir, I do." The man then started to make deep eye contact with me via the rearview mirror. And do you believe that God forgives, no matter how vile the sin? Well, that would depend on the sin, sir, I said awkwardly. What if that sin was taking another life? The man replied, in a creep voice. Did he just admit to murder? I thought to myself. I gripped my steering wheel tightly, trying not to appear fazed by what the man had just said, and answered his question as vaguely as possible. I don't know, sir. A slight grin morphed on his face. He pulled out a flask from the pocket of his leather jacket and took a large sip. The smell of aggressive alcohol engulfed my nostrils. I hated that smell. Want a drink? I couldn't believe he just asked me that. I was literally driving him home. Of course not. I'm driving. For the last little duration of the drive, the man said nothing, but his eyes remained fixated on me through the rearview mirror. I was so relieved when I finally arrived at his house. Before exiting the car, the man tapped on the shoulder and said, "Thanks for answering my questions, son." Don't mention it," I stuttered nervously. I watched the guy walk up his driveway and enter his house before driving off at a moderate speed. I've had some unusual encounters since, but nothing like this. It's been around 2 years, and that creepy guy still pops into my head from time to time. Was he actually trying to confess to a murder? Or was he just a drunken old fool who asked the weirdest of questions after he's had one too many? I honestly don't know. What do you think? Rick Patson had just been involved in a serious argument with his wife, Sasha, and decided to leave the house. They had been having problems for a while, but it all culminated in a war of words that crossed far too many lines. He was upset about her sending more money to her brother, who was a well-known drug user. Things were tight financially for Rick and Sasha, and he didn't appreciate her transferring a substantial amount of money without even running it by him first. Rick made an Uber order from his regular driver, Milo, who he had been using for a few months. Milo arrived within minutes. He sat in the back seat, pondering his life, contemplating whether or not he wanted to remain married to Sasha. As he left his deep train of thought, Rick noticed that Milo had missed the left turn he was supposed to take a half a mile back, and was now heading towards a trail that led into some nearby woods. "Bro, you've passed it. Marco's bar was back the other way." Milo didn't respond. He just stared straight ahead as he drove further into the woods. A look of determination dominated Milo's face. He was a man with a deadly plan. After about 5 minutes of non-stop driving through the woods, Milo stopped. He turned off the ignition and then reached under the driver's seat. Rick's eyes expanded in size as he saw Milo holding a pistol. "Milo, why are you doing this? Are you in trouble? Maybe I can help." "I'm doing this because I love Sasha, and she loves me," said Milo as he turned himself around to face Rick. Rick couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I'm sorry, Rick, but she needs that insurance money, and I'm gonna make sure she gets it." Milo then pointed his pistol at Rick's head, which prompted Rick to close his eyes, knowing that his life was about to come to an end. Every living creature that resided in the woods fled as the sound of a gunshot spread throughout. Milo then stepped out of the car and took a deep breath. He removed his Samsung Galaxy A7 from his jean pocket and made a phone call. "Is it done?" said a concerned Sasha on the other end. "It's done, baby. Now we can reap the benefits." A faint smile crossed Milo's face as he ended the call. He then walked away into the distance, leaving Rick's body behind as it began the decaying process.